Hello, I'm Justin Perkins. This is Talk Junkie, and today we're going to talk about something near and dear to my heart. We're going to talk about TV. Now, I thought about all the different ways I could do this and all the different approaches, so I started writing down TV shows and things of that nature, and it led me to do some research. And this show's been in works kind of for a while back, and I've had all this planned out and just haven't had a chance to do it. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a little bit of a pandemic going on. And so, attention somewhat gets diverted. But I decided to go ahead and kind of knock this thing out. I've already recorded this once, and it was interrupted and lost due to a phone call. So, more than likely that will happen again. And it gets frustrating when recording on my phone with this app, but it is the way I do it. So, here we go. Now, I got to looking at all these shows, and in doing it, I got to looking at networks and thought, well, man, it would be neat not only to do one about shows, but to do a couple episodes about some networks. And after kind of looking at stuff I watched, not only as a small kid, but as a preteen, and then as a teenager, going into the end of my high school years, it became very clear to me that one channel, one station, one network, was very dominant in my viewing. And so then I went and kind of looked at the shows that they had on there and realized a lot of the shows that I was not sure where I'd seen those shows, I'd actually seen on this network. And kind of got interested in looking at this network on its own, as a show just about this network and the shows that were on it. Now, before I tell you the network that this show's on, I'm going to give it away because I'm going to play. It's probably only going to work for the male demographic of my age that grew up watching this show, but I want to say that a lot of young boys in their early to mid-teens, even late teens, grew up watching this show because it was just a risque show, if you will. And I think when I play a little bit of this song, it's going to give that away for a couple people. That is the theme song, the intro song to Silk Stockings. And Silk Stockings was a very popular late night show on USA Network. I've spoken about USA Network on a couple of different instances here and there on the show before. Mainly about USA Up All Night. But when I went back and really looked at some of the shows I watched and got to looking at where some of these shows aired, I realized that even from a young age, USA Network was really big in my viewing. Obviously, as a kid, we start out with cartoons, or at least most of us do. Well, the USA Network had that covered because they had the USA Cartoon Express, one of my favorite programs growing up. It was the little guy on the train. It was a polar bear at one point in time. He was the conductor. He got cartoons on and off the train, and you watched the cartoons. It was kind of like their version of Saturday morning cartoons, or they did it in the weekdays too, because I can remember it before school. I don't remember it much in the summer, but I was not going to be inside watching cartoons in the summer, so that's probably why. Now, there were a lot of shows on here that I know I seen on USA Cartoon Express. I know I've seen Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles other places, but I definitely seen it on Cartoon Express. G.I. Joe, I remember mostly from Cartoon Express. GoBots, I remember almost exclusively from Cartoon Express. I remember Transformers being on Cartoon Express, but I did not look to see if that was listed, but that's where I remember it from. Snorks, Jabberjaw, Laugh Olympics, which I loved, Mask, Mr. T, Scooby-Doo, which I saw Scooby-Doo everywhere, still do. But that was one of the places that I saw it growing up. Not as prevalently there as I did as like TNT and other places, but was it Buford and the Ghost Chasers, or Buford and the Galloping Ghost, whatever it was. Captain Caveman, Defenders of Earth, Grape Ape. There was a Grape Ape show on there. I remember He-Man from there, Hair Bear Bunch. I remember the Real Ghostbusters. I remember them from there. I remember Space Ghost, Speed Buggy, Hulk Hogan's Rockin' Wrestling. I remember it seems like from one of the big networks as well, but I do remember it being on USA Cartoon Express. Herculoids. Oh man, I mean, the myriad of Yogi cartoons they had. Yogi Bear Bunch, or is it Gang? Yogi Bear Gang. Yogi Bear, Space Race, so many. Thundar and the Barbarians, Willie and the Chopper Bunch. I only remember that from Cartoon Express. There were other cartoons on there, and the Mario cartoon, Super Mario, Super Show, I think it was. But most of those shows also were carried over into what later on replaced Cartoon Express, which was USA Action Extreme Team, I think it was. I wrote it down, but I wrote down the list, but I didn't write down the name. I'm pretty sure it was USA Action Extreme Team. I don't remember this as well. This is older on, but I did watch some of these. I just got a list of their stuff. They had Sonic, Super Mario 3, Double Dragon, Street Fighter, Street Sharks, Super Mario, Super Show, Gargoyles, Highlander, Animated Show, Mighty Max, Superman, Batman, Wildcats, which I don't exactly remember what that was. Mortal Kombat Show, Ultra Force, a couple more. I'm not as attached to that, obviously. I think that probably took over 97 sometime in there. I was kind of out of the loop on that one. But USA Cartoon Express was a huge, huge part of my childhood. And I still watch, like, I'll get on YouTube and watch the bumpers and the intros and things like that with my son and kind of show them to him, and the commercials that came on that time. I would definitely, if they ever come up with a retro USA network that played this stuff, definitely get on there and watch that. My son would as well. He likes that type of stuff, that type of retro stuff. But I really loved Cartoon Express. The other thing I really loved from my childhood all the way up to probably 20, after right around 2000, 2001 sometime, and when Vince bought everything, was wrestling. And I've always proclaimed to be a huge WCW fan first. But I watched a lot of WWF. It's just, I don't know what it was. I was like every other kid in the 80s. I was the diehard good guy, you know. That's kind of what the 80s were about, was this over-the-top patriotism and good guys. But in wrestling, was one of the few exceptions. I liked Ric Flair. And I did like Sting, who was a good guy, but I liked Ric Flair. I liked Sting first. I liked him more. But sometimes leaned more towards the bad guys for some reason in wrestling, just a little bit. The Jake the Snakes, the Macho Mans, especially when they would turn face and be good. I really liked that. But I had a distaste for Hogan that never left me. I still have it. And so I guess that's why I always said I was a bigger WCW fan. But WWF had a lot of content, and a lot of that content was on USA Network, and I seen a lot of that content. WWF Action Zone, All American Wrestling, something I remember and really liked. Primetime Wrestling. I didn't watch Primetime Wrestling as much. I've seen it, but I wonder when I've seen it and how, because I don't have distinct memories of seeing it when I was younger. Superstars of Wrestling, I loved. Livewire, WWF Mania, Sunday Night Heat. Sunday Night Heat became this really cool thing for people like me who couldn't afford to buy the pay-per-views all the time. I would watch this show that led into the pay-per-view, had what they called basically an undercard, free show, you know. Sunday Night Heat became a big show for me. Now, there was Tuesday Night Titans. I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know that I ever watched that show. It was probably before, even if I had, I wouldn't have much of a memory of it. I would have been real young. I just don't. For some reason, I know very well what it is. I know a lot of the big matches and things that happened on Tuesday Night Titans, but I don't have any first-hand recollection of it. That's all going back and viewing things past tense. Now, later on, like in the last few years, for maybe a couple years, SmackDown made its way there. But the big thing in wrestling on the WWF network was Monday Night Raw. And it was huge, and it changed wrestling. It was part of that Monday Night War and it was such a huge part of wrestling and watching wrestling when I was a kid. And I just, to me, it and Nitro are obviously the two most important shows in wrestling history. And, USA has this, they had me as a kid. They had the wrestling, they had the cartoons, they had everything. But they had some other stuff that I probably shouldn't have been watching as a kid, but I was. And they had some other things that really, really locked me in. I guess if I were going to sit down and give you the 4 things that make me think the most about USA, or 5, that really, this is what I think of when I think of USA. I think of Duckman, an animated series that I loved, that was more mature, definitely. I think of Farm Club, a show with Matt Pinfield that they had the bands I was into a lot of times and the type of music I was into on there, and it was a show I really enjoyed. I think it only lasted one season. I think it was only on from like 99 to 2000, but I would record Farm Club all the time. Obviously, Monday Night Raw was a huge part of my childhood growing up, and even my my later years, my late teens. USA Up All Night was probably one of my single most favorite things on USA Network, and I basically covered everything they ever had on in a previous episode. But I love USA Up All Night. I like the goofy, raunchy comedies. I like the horrible B movies. I like just the ridiculous kind of like horror B movies. I liked everything they did. They also did some martial arts movies, and they also did some movies that were good movies that I later come to love. And that 5th thing is Silk Stockings. I don't know why, but obviously I do know why. It was a sex-driven show, and I was a teenage boy, so Silk Stockings was huge for me, and I literally got into watching it to where I watched episodes of it. And I look back, and if you factor in La Femme Nikita and things of that nature, USA is what was on my TV probably most nights of the week. If there wasn't a Bulls basketball game on WGN, or I wasn't watching, I watched TRL on MTV when I was a teenager because, like I said, my metal bands were on there for the first time ever. But if it wasn't on those things, it was probably on USA Network. I mean, it became that big of a part, and I didn't realize how much I watched from there. Because there's things that I remembered from there that I didn't realize that's where I remembered them from. There's a lot. So I'm going to go over some shows and touch on some shows that I found in research or I thought about before the research. I remember the show Airwolf and loved it growing up. Airwolf was made by one of the networks, I'm sure. I didn't look into that. And was probably syndicated to USA. USA is definitely where I seen Airwolf. So I got into looking at the syndicated shows on USA. And I realized there were a lot of syndicated shows. Then there were some shows I wasn't sure about where they had came from and things of that nature. Shows like Tattooed Teenage Alien Fighters from Beverly Hills. It even sounds like it's a USA show. I believe that was a USA show. Again, I looked up some syndicated shows and didn't find that on the syndicated shows. Tech War, Weird Science, the series, not just the movie, but the series, because they would play a lot of those movies all the time. That's where I remember seeing Money Can't Buy Me Love. That's probably on USA Up All Night. But that's where I remember seeing all these different 80s movies. And then they came up with the Weird Science television series. There was some video or some games on there, like game shows. There's Bumper Stumper, which I believe was original to USA. There was a show that I found during research that I don't remember, that I want to go back and find again, and I cannot think of what it was called. But another show was Commander USA's Groovy Movies. Now, when I first seen that, it automatically clicked in my head, hey, I know this show. And then I kind of looked at some stuff on it, and I seen the guy, and I was like, okay, I know what this is. Then I kind of looked at some of the movies that were on there, and it was mostly horror and sci-fi and some stuff I hadn't seen. I kind of always dug sci-fi, but horror I was iffy on. But then, as soon as it popped up, I found some clips and stuff of kind of like the Lucha Libre wrestling and the really cheesy Chinese martial arts movies. Then it dawned on me where I remember that show from, and that was, they have this history, which a lot of small channels do, or a lot of networks in general. They'll take what I'm assuming is probably public domain movies, or even movies that aren't as expensive to buy, put hosts with them. That's kind of what USA Up All Night is. They've done that with a lot of different things, a lot of different people over the years. Elvira is the queen of that. But USA Network has a pretty good history of that, from USA Up All Night to Commander USA's Groovy Movies to Real Wild Cinema with Sandra Bernhardt. That was kind of grindhouse-like stuff. I wasn't big on it, but I always was extremely, just intrigued by Sandra Bernhardt. Her comedy, a lot of things about her. So I remember watching that. That's Part of USA was on, obviously it's on USA. Night Flight was on USA. So USA has this big, kind of swath of the Swamp Thing show. I don't know if that was original USA, but it was on USA, and I really liked it. Miami Vice, I probably seen Miami Vice maybe in its original run on the original network. I don't know. I think it was that CBS, or I can't remember. But I do remember very plainly watching it a couple times on USA, and I think it had a limited run, just a year or two. They showed a couple seasons of it, but I watched it there. I believe they picked up some shows that they continued on. Like they picked up some shows 2 seasons in, 3 seasons, something like that, and continued on. Ray Bradbury Theater, another thing kind of in the realm of these hosted shows. Ray Bradbury Theater was on USA. Now, we were talking about their syndicated shows. There's a show I found I didn't realize was syndicated, but USA Saturday Nightmares. I remember that show. I didn't realize that would be considered a syndicated show. I guess maybe they syndicated it. It's not something they bought from syndication. They also had Alfred Hitchcock Hour, American Gladiators, which I loved growing up. I thought it was the neatest show. And I can remember 2 friends that lived fairly close to me. We would try to recreate some of the little challenges from American Gladiator, and it was fun to do. America's Funniest Home Videos, I remember being on USA. Baywatch, I remember being on USA. I remember being homesick from school sometimes and watching The Facts of Life on USA. Hercules was on USA. One of my favorite shows, Highlander, was on USA. I believe it was on other channels. I believe it was also on Sci-Fi, maybe WGN. There's a lot of places played it, but I remember it from USA. Hollywood Squares, a show that I know was definitely on other places, there's no doubt. But I remember that from the USA Network. Knight Rider, probably the biggest show I remember being on USA Network that I watched with a lot of frequency was MacGyver. I remember that a lot. Magnum P.I., Major Dad, Murder, She Wrote. Murder, She Wrote was something that my grandparents watched when I was younger a lot. And I remember watching a lot of it. And I can't say that I seen it on USA Network only. I don't know if that was their show or a major network show. I didn't look. But it was on there. They had it, and they had it for a long period of time. So it's possible I've seen that somewhere else. My Two Dads, I do remember seeing on USA Network. People's Court, I remember seeing on USA Network. Now, Quantum Leap was on USA Network, and I know I watched a lot of it on USA Network, but I also watched it some in its original run at my grandfather's house, and Sci-Fi Channel, I believe, one of the other channels played it again years later. I was a huge Quantum Leap fan, so I watched it in a lot of different places. Walker, Texas Ranger was on there, but in fairness, I do believe Walker, Texas Ranger may have been the only show on, like, UPN or WGN at one time. A lot of networks played Walker Texas Ranger, but that's where I started with Walker Texas Ranger, was on, and I did watch a lot of Walker Texas Ranger. Win, Lose, or Draw was on there, and that's the only place I ever remember seeing that, and I remember really liking that game show and not getting to see it a lot. Wings is a show that I believe was originally an NBC run or something like that, but the first place I seen it was USA Network, and may not have been the first place, but that's the place I watched it 90% of the time. I went back and did this research and realized how much of USA Network I really did watch. And it's not just those shows. Obviously, USA Up All Night was huge. Again, it's something that I always go to. Cartoon Express was huge when I was younger. It's something that I always kind of look back on. But there's a lot of different things in there that I really like. But the movies that they showed, you know, I could be completely off on this and wrong, but whether they deserve credit or not, I credit seeing the Beastmaster movies. The Beastmaster, I remember seeing the Beastmaster on USA. Whether I did or not, I don't know, but that's where I remember seeing it. Remember the USA logo at the bottom of the screen, like that's how I remember that movie. Same thing with Conan, same thing with Red Sonja. That's the way I remember that movie. Just like with the Sinbad movies and a couple of those movies like that. The the Iliad type movies. I remember a WGN in the corner. I'm that way with Beastmaster and seeing it on USA Network. That's what I remember. The Iron Eagle movie, I remember seeing it on USA Network. What's the dance movie with Kevin Bacon? Footloose. I remember Footloose from USA Network. I remember Weird Science from USA Network. I remember seeing Back to the Future on TV from USA Network. And I think maybe the reason I remember this is we rented a lot of movies. At one point, we started renting a whole lot of movies. Once the VCR was available and our ability to rent the movies was there, we really started to rent movies. So I didn't watch as many movies on TV. And if I did, a lot of times I recorded them if it's something that I wanted. And a lot of times I would record off of USA. Like, I remember there was a snow day. We got a pretty good snow. I mean, it was a pretty good snow. And it was a Sunday, and it was snowing us out of school. There was going to be no school the next day. And it's like 4 or 5 o'clock on a Sunday, something like that. And on NBC, I recorded Enter the Dragon because it was on there. And I still had that VHS with that movie on for years. A lot of my movies that I recorded that way had the USA logo on the bottom because they played a lot of movies I was interested in, especially the USA Up All Night movies. So I started out, actually at this point, probably a month back. It's before the Rona rolled in, and everybody, had to deal with this situation. But it was before the coronavirus kind of came in that I started this and was looking at touching on movies and TV that I liked as a kid because, I've said since day one, when summer gets here, I'm going to do my summer list of movies that I watch every summer. I'm going to do my Halloween and my Christmas because that's something that I think my wife thinks is odd that I watch the same group of movies every year. And then there's other movies that when I have the opportunity, I kind of insert them into that ritual. But I also wanted to do that with TV. And when I initially sit down to do this and write down shows, what I thought I would end up with was nothing but Saturday morning cartoons from the major networks. And then as I went on, I was thinking, well, maybe I'll give Saturday morning cartoons their own kind of thing. But, man, Nickelodeon had to be huge for me as a kid because I remember all these shows, the not just the cartoons, but the shows that I watched as I got older, and like Are You Afraid of the Dark is one of my favorite shows growing up as a kid. I remember me and my brother watching it with my dad all the time, and I really liked that show. There were so many shows that made an impact from Nickelodeon. Like, it doesn't surprise me that Nickelodeon, has a lot of these shows from my childhood because I kind of expected that. And I expected that, like, MTV would have a huge part of my teenage years, which, looking back, it really didn't. It just had a little bit of music on there. There were some shows. I mean, there was the Beavis and Buttheads and the Aeon Flux and Liquid Television, things of that nature. But still, I was really surprised at how much the USA Network really had to do with my TV watching growing up, and what a huge factor it was. And I couldn't even tell you what's on the USA Network right now. I know the dog show's probably still on there because it's been there forever, and I think tennis is probably still on there because it's been on there forever. It seems like there was a lot of golf on there when I was younger. But looking back, at one point in time, USA had NBA games, NHL games. You know, that was well before it's early 80s, maybe late 70s. But I didn't realize how big and important of a Channel USA was. And I wonder if they have rights to a lot of these things. I wonder if they still have rights to show the original, I guess, movies that came with USA Up All Night and how that worked. You know, I wonder if they've got Duckman laying around and the few episodes of Farm Club there are, the Swamp Thing series, the Ray Bradbury Theater. I wonder if they can still get the Night Flight stuff, because I know they've got a website or whatever now. I wonder if they still have the old Real Wild Cinemas and the Commander USA's Groovy Movies and the USA Saturday Nightmares. You know, obviously, I'm sure they could probably obtain the Hitchcock Hour, you know, and the Gladiator stuff. Why they don't release something in the form of a retro channel, you know. That's something about the WWE Network and what it's done that's really amazing. Like, I don't have it currently because when I get stuff, I binge. And with wrestling, I'm more interested in the behind-the-scenes stuff. So that's more documentary things now. Or really old wrestling, Smoky Mountain and, you know, all these. I can go with so many different federations and so many different companies and so many different things on there that every once in a while I'll just go back and see what they've added. And, you know, the Mid-South stuff, if they add the Mid-South stuff, and watch it. USA could easily do that, and I didn't realize what kind of a power-packed lineup they had, if they still had rights to a lot of those things, because I know the cartoons and stuff like that they didn't own. But if they could still do USA Cartoon Express with some of those old cartoons, most of those old cartoons, and follow that up with some syndicated stuff, and, you know, end that at night with their Silk Stockings and the older shows. And I think there were 900 and some episodes of USA Up All Night. They have enough USA Up All Night to run them for a long time. I mean, a long time. Now, there was one show, and there's a raving television addict out there somewhere that may hear this. I didn't look it up. I'm going to look it up afterwards. He may know this already. There's a show I really like, and Muggles may know this. There's a show I really like called Mystery Science Theater 3000. I remember that show for whatever reason. I watched it a lot, and it's amazing how it gets twisted in my head. I remember that show being on Comedy Central. I also remember seeing that show with a sci-fi symbol in the bottom of the screen, as well as a USA Network. I see no history of it being on USA Network. I wonder, was it ever on Sci-Fi? I know that started out in a small local market on a small local channel, and then made its way, you know, to what it is now, and it's had the variations of riff tracks and all that, which I think may be better. And now it's obviously on Netflix. But, you know, maybe that's something that Pluto TV or Netflix or somebody could get in sync with it. I want my USA Up All Night is what I want. And it's not just the movies, because I can find the movies, but I want the host. I want all of that. And I don't know. I like doing these. These are fun for me. I had a good time. Like I said, I like doing the movies and TV ones and the music ones. We didn't have to talk about nothing serious today. I didn't have to talk all that trippy stuff. But I don't know. It I have no idea if this is working, because another phone call tried to beep in. And just in case I get cut off, I'm going to cut this off right here. USA Network, give me my shows back.